team. Sustainable Trumbull's.
Can you turn Pam's video on? I don't think she's on. Her video. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm on the Sustainable Trumbull team. Sustainable Trumbull's goal is to earn certification from Sustainable Connecticut, which is something that 48 other Connecticut towns have done. I encourage you all to follow our group on Facebook and Instagram to see what other initiatives are and to hear more about our progress. Also, check out Sustainable Connecticut's website to see more about the whole endeavor. This evening, we're going to be talking about invasive plants. As an avid gardener, removing these interlopers is something that I'm passionate about. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our host, Alice Ely. She's a Yukon Advanced Master Gardener and Yukon Master Composter, and she calls Westport's Wakeman Town Farm her happy place. In addition to her role as Gardens Chair at Wakeman Town Farm, she spreads the word about the pollinator pathway and teaches homeowners how to become good stewards of their yards through her gardening coaching business, gardenwithalice.com. When she's not busy avenging invasives in someone else's garden, you'll find her doing the same in her own. So thank you, Alice. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Pam. Everyone, I'm so happy that you were able to join us tonight. This is an encore presentation. We gave this at Wakeman Town Farm via Zoom earlier in the summer, and there were we had a number of people who couldn't make the Zoom, and we had forgotten to hit the record button, so we had nothing for posterity. I was delighted when Trumbull invited me to give the talk again. This time we are recording it, and without further explanation, I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see the lovely slides. And here we go. All right then. So, what I am presenting tonight is the result of a wonderful collaboration with Wakeman Town Farm's Staples High School senior interns who spent the last month of their high school careers, two sturdy souls elected to join me in this invasives adventure, and they were primarily responsible for putting together this wonderful guide to invasives. Our mission had been to keep it to just 10 plants, but wouldn't you know, a 10th snuck in, which is just what invasives always do, is they sneak in when you're looking the other way. So there are, we're going to teach you how to recognize and how to get rid of 11 different invasive plants tonight. These are the ones we find most problematic in our area through doing a lot of surveying of open spaces and backyards with our trusty intern team. And you may have your own personal bête noire who's not on this list, but you will surely find some of these lurking in your backyard. So, next. What are invasive plants? We are using the definition of invasive plants that the state of Connecticut uses, which is that they are non-native plants that are not naturally found in our ecosystem here in North America, which means any plant introduced in North America after 1492 is considered a non-native. When you have a plant that is a non-native, that has high seed output, early seasonal emergence, that means they beat the other plants to the punch, spreads rapidly, able to live in a wide range of environments, and has aggressive roots, bingo, you've got an invasive. Connecticut is unusual in that it actually classifies invasives by state law. And once you've landed on the Connecticut invasives list, that means you're not allowed to plant it, you're not allowed to sell it. And some of you might say, who on earth would ever want to plant these? Well, some of these started out as friendly little garden additions. Little did we know. So, why are invasive plants a problem? Well, they actually limit biodiversity. And everything in our ecosystem is part of a food web that, when in balance, can regulate itself. The eaters eat the plants, the eaters then prosper, other eaters eat them. It's all tied together, and at the foundation are plants. These plants, these invasives, they're non-native, they didn't evolve with our insects and mammals, and therefore the insects and mammals haven't learned how to eat them for the most part. They support far fewer species. So an imported dogwood may support 2 species, and the native dogwood can support more than 100. That's an example. So this creates a loss of natural habitat. And whenever you have habitat loss, animal populations of all kinds decrease. Unfortunately, because of these very aggressive invasives, many of our open spaces are becoming, in effect, food deserts for our native insects and animals, because they can't find the stuff they can forage on. Protecting the environment from invasives actually begins in our own yards, because that is where a lot of these invasives got their start. Here it is, the enemy in our midst. In this one picture, there are something like 6 different invasives choking out anything that we might possibly want. This is actually in the environs of Longshore, which is in some ways a very groomed area, but look at all this. And these are our fearless invasive avengers, Tallulah Goldberg and Ben Spector, who I had to give credit here for all the work that they did putting this together, and also a lot of field work that they did. Here they are at Earth Place in Westport, having just slaved for a couple hours pulling up many of the invasives we're going to talk about today, and you'll notice that they're bagging them, and I'll explain more about that later. So before I begin talking about a specific plants, I want to cover first the terms for organic removal methods that you're going to want to be very familiar with. Good old hand pulling, yes, this is the basic tool that we all have at hand, so to speak. And hand pulling and digging is applicable for most yard infestations. Some specialty tools, if you've got a big yard and you've got a lot of really stubborn invasives, I'll mention which ones those are as we go along, may require a specialty tool. There's something called the root jack, my personal favorite, the uprooter, and the weed wrench. These are tools that help save your hands and your shoulders by grabbing at woody plants. Now, a woody plant is a plant where the stem is still there when it loses its leaves in the winter, and it's got a very woody stem. Herbaceous plants are ones where it's kind of a pulpy stem and it disappears completely in the wintertime. So with woody stems, these tools that act like wrenches that grip the plant and lever them out of the ground are a great component for your tools in your garage. Cutting, some you can control just by cutting and cutting and cutting. Repeated cutting and or mowing counts as cutting, will gradually weaken the plant because you're taking away its ability to provide food for itself by photosynthesis. So you're basically starving the plant out, which is very satisfying, right? Goats. I mentioned goats because we're quite fond of the role they play in weed control at the farm. And this may not be practical for your backyard, but some people are curious about it. And yes, goats can be used. The thing is, they are definitely non-discriminating weeders. They will mow everything. Where goats are really great is that we have some parcels of land at the farm which were just impossible to get under control, and the town would come in and try and brush hog them, and they couldn't get there that often and everything, and it was a fenced area. Well, lo and behold, enter our goats, and they're now doing a bang-up job of controlling some really nasty things like Japanese knotweed for us. Organic removal methods continued. Girdling is a trick that you can do on an invasive plant that has bark, a tree. So notice that the outer layer of bark has been removed as in a girdle all around the tree. This interrupts the flow of nutrients which come up in that outside skin of bark. That's where the plant transports energy to its leaves. So by removing this, you can kill the tree. This is great for a good sized sapling that you can't get down any other way. Burning, be very careful, but you can do this. Follow the guidance. You'll notice that in this presentation and in the PDF that you receive afterward, all of the more extended tips are linked into the presentation. And burning with a butane torch can be very, very effective. You have to make sure you're doing it on I would say a cloudy day, so you have good visual on exactly where the flame is. I would do it on right after a rain, so you're basically sort of steam killing the plant, and also right after the rain, you don't have to worry about brush catching, but read the article before you attempt this. It is, however, extremely satisfying, particularly if you have pavers and things like that where you'd be weeding all day, okay? Smothering. Smothering is a really good technique that doesn't get a lot of publicity, and smothering, you can apply a layer of newspapers or cardboard. I prefer cardboard. I think it does a better job of the smothering, topped by a very thick layer of wood chips or mulch or chopped leaves or just leaves. And this is the timed approach. If you have maybe an area of your yard, everybody's got one. We had an old neglected area that had just gotten nasty with every conceivable invasive, and we smothered it. We laid down sheets of cardboard. Everybody has lots of cardboard these days because they're getting lots of deliveries. Strip the tape off because the tape doesn't biodegrade, but the cardboard does. You lay the cardboard down and then you put your wood chips. By the way, we sure have a lot of wood chips. I'm sure you can get an arborist or a tree surgeon to give you some nice pile of wood chips and pile it on. And the weeds will get smothered, and you can even do it again. It will prepare the ground for planting something you actually want, or if you're not ready to deal with it, you can just keep piling that mulch on, take it another year or two, and when you're ready to plant there, most of the weeds will have given up the ghost by that time. So that's a great trick. Solarization is somewhat tricky here in New England. It's a great technique in Texas, someplace where you get lots and lots of sun, hot sun, but you can do it here if you time it for when the days are long and the sun is hot. Surprisingly, you use clear plastic. Everybody thinks you use black plastic, but clear plastic is what you use. And again, the link that we've included here is great. One thing that everybody thinks will work, and it does for a while, but in the long run, very disappointing results, is weed block. It's a short-term fix if you're just desperate to get an area under control, but long-term, when you leave weed block in an area for more than a season, what happens is debris accumulates on top of it, weed seeds accumulate on top of it. Next thing you know, you've got weeds growing on top of it, and their roots form this impenetrable mesh with the weed block. And then you're trying to rip it up, and you're ripping up roots that have pierced through the weed block and are growing under it and everything. It's like it's chained in place, and it's really a tricky thing to do. So if you're using weed block, do not leave it there for more than a season, is my advice, because long-term, it doesn't solve the problem the way these other techniques will. The next tip I'm going to give you is I'm going to say a few words about chemical removal methods. And I do want to say, on behalf of the pollinator pathway in the Green Corridor, we advise homeowners to refrain from the use of chemical control methods. You are using, with an herbicide, you are using a broad brush indeed. They are non-specific. They will kill whatever is in their way, with the exception of a genetically modified crop. So that's why Roundup kills everything except genetically modified crops. Well, this isn't that situation. In extreme cases, people who manage many acres of open space will resort to using chemicals. What they do is cut and paint, and they literally cut the stems and paint the stems with an herbicide. This is not something that a homeowner really needs to resort to because you're dealing with a small amount of space. And as a master gardener, I am actually prohibited from giving you advice on using herbicides. What we do is provide you advice such as the link that's in this document that tells you exactly how to do it, because we don't want the responsibility of giving you accidentally not giving you the right information or giving you information verbally. So for extreme situations such as large tracts of open space, there are times when people resort to this, but I am not advising it here. I'm going to give you other ways to do it. If you want to look into it, you can look up our links. So this now brings us to the plant profile part of the program. And in just a minute, I'm going to turn this over to Pam. And what I am going to tell you first is I'm going to show you the plant at the first of our plant profile pages. The rest of these are in the deck, and this with wonderful photographs and illustrations. Illustrations were actually done by Tallulah. Our intern did these herself, and they're great because they show you exactly the features to look for on each plant. But from here on in, because Pam has collected the live plants, I'm going to talk you through what you would have been seeing on these slides, and instead the visual you're going to have is Pam showing you the real thing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Mary is going to switch over to Pam. Very good. So for our first invasive, you are seeing on the screen, this is Japanese stiltgrass. And this is one you're going to want to watch for right now. Now, what you can see, it kind of is jointed. It's sort of like knobby knees, and it has, I think that's why it's called stiltgrass, but it has joints, and it tends to almost look like bamboo when a whole lot of it is growing, but don't be fooled. Now, what Pam is also showing you is how tiny its root system is. This plant's only endearing attribute is that it's easy to pull up. Now, the problem with Japanese stiltgrass is it looks kind of tame and pretty, and then about this time of year, it starts just covering. It's like you turn around and it's invaded your entire garden. So my strong advice in dealing with this plant is know that it is an annual, which means that it propagates solely by seed. And because it propagates solely by seed, don't let it go to seed. Get it out now. It is just about ready to go to seed. So it is so easy to hand pull. You can pull it by the fistful. Just go through now and get it out before it sets seed. Then you can just dispose of this on your brush pile, no problem. Once it has seeds, don't let this anywhere near your compost heap. For sure, you don't want to disperse these seeds into your compost heap. You'll be seeing them again next year. So get them out now. If you go out in your yard, you'll probably see plenty of this lurking in every bed. If you can keep it under control by mowing if it's infiltrated your grass, but the main thing is always watch for it. My husband and I pulled up scads of this plant, scads and scads last year, and I said, there's none left. Well, sure enough, some showed up this year, not as much as before, but some showed up. So that's the trick on Japanese stiltgrass, and you want to get rid of that one. So the next one Pam is going to show you is garlic mustard. A garlic mustard is an interesting plant because it is edible. And some people really like, you can Google, there are recipes, believe it or not, in the appendix of this very presentation. We included some information on its edibility. But right now, what Pam is showing you is an interesting feature of garlic mustard. Okay, so notice the scallop edge, and notice this almost looks like a bib, this one. This plant is a biennial. You are looking at year one. Now, in year one, this plant does not set seed. That's because it's a biennial. So, and it forms what is called a basal rosette. So you might see this very genteel, this little plant close to the ground, kind of looks like a violet leaf, but no, not a violet leaf. Notice it's sort of somewhat crinkly veining and that scalloped edge, not like anything else. Very easy to pull at this stage, easy to get out. Look at that nice, simple little root. So when you see these basal rosettes, yank them, and the plant will not return in year two to set seeds and take over your yard or your garden. So I think you have the biennial, the older plant, the year two plant, right, Pam? Do you, or did you already show it with the year two plant? Okay, so the year two, she is too good a weeder. This is really remarkable. Okay, you can look in your deck. Year two plant has stipules, which are seed pods that stick up, and that's where the trouble starts. So in year two, you get a nice, pretty little white flower early in the season, and you can spot them. Look for those white flowers and get them quickly. Once the stipules are present, the recommendation of UConn and our conservation department is bag the plant. If the seed pods are on it, get rid of it. Bag it. Do not let that anywhere near your compost pile or your brush pile, and don't take it to the brush dump either. If the brush dump is, those things get mulched and wind up in someone else's lawn. So they don't want you taking this plant with seed pods on it to the brush dump, because that just spreads it. So that's the important thing to remember on this one. Okay, next one that Pam has for you is Japanese knotweed, the infamous Japanese knotweed. And right now it is starting to bloom. And when you see it bloom, you understand how somebody was silly enough to import this for their yard. I mean, it is an unstoppable plant. It gets all over, it covers everything. It really outcompetes. I've seen it cover hillsides. I've seen it cover entire slopes in open spaces. It is a huge, 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 huge problem. So notice the sort of spade-shaped leaf. It has an almost flat bottom where it joins the stem. So Pam, show that. See how it has an almost flat bottom where the leaf joins the stem? And it also has a kind of a jointed aspect. And if you get in really close, it has almost a reddish node where the leaf joins the stem. So it's pretty easy to recognize. Dealing with it, not so easy. So because she's showing you the rhizomes, this is the unfortunate thing about this plant, is the rhizomes, you could get the whole plant out, you'd leave a little rhizome behind, and it's going to send a new shoot. So it's a war of attrition that we use to get rid of Japanese knotweed. Removal consists of repeatedly cutting back and cutting back and cutting back of the shoots. So they don't have time to grow new leaves. The leaves is what sends food back to the root. So the root relies on that photosynthesis to regenerate and create the starches the plant needs to keep trying to grow. So what we did with, this is one that our goats do a great job. We had a section of knotweed, of Japanese knotweed, and there wasn't anything else growing there. And the goats just kept eating it down and eating it down. And it's now in year 2, it's barely managing to keep resprouting. Eventually we'll be done with it. So you can do that yourselves, even without goats. You've got this, is just keep cutting it back and cutting it back until it is no more. It is going to be, unfortunately, a continuous job because with these attractive blossoms, the pollinators can't get enough of them. Let's get rid of this one. Give the pollinators something native instead, so that they're not pollinating this plant. We need to get control of this. You can drive down. I drive down Cross Highway to the farm, and I see it growing by the side of the road. What a nuisance. Okay, enough on Japanese knotweed. Let's go to the next nightmare in the garden. This one has a name that sounds like it's straight out of Harry Potter. It's called mugwort. So here's mugwort. It's sometimes called false chrysanthemum, and it can fool you. When it first starts growing, look at that nice tidy leaf. So tame. Sure, that must be some chrysanthemum. I'm sure I planted some chrysanthemum there. No, you didn't. Mugwort. Now, mugwort is the giveaway, is the flip side. So Pam's going to flip it over. Pam, if you can bring that way up to the camera, they can see how sort of silvery white that back is. So, and mugwort kind of changes its shape as the plant matures. The leaves change shape and they get pointier and sort of skinnier as they reach for the top. So you can say, is that really mugwort? That looks kind of different. But you flip it over, you see that whitish silvery leaf on the back, and you're like, yep, I'm looking at mugwort. Okay, bad news on mugwort. This is the devil to get rid of, especially once it gets established, because it too has rhizomes. When you see the roots, when you see how that bottom root on that is sort of heading sideways? Point to that with your finger, Pam. The root's heading sideways. Yep. See them where they stick out sideways? That's the rhizome. It's moving to another spot where it'll send up a new plant somewhere else. And those rhizomes are tough as heck. So what you really have to do is just smothering works. If you've got a section where the mugwort is taken over, try smothering. And just let there be a nice coating of mulch and nothing else growing there for a while, and smother that. I mean, start by cutting the whole plant, cutting it down to the base, cut everything you see down to the base and smother the area. If you've got just a few individual plants, I would go ahead and pull them by the root. I've done that when it's not so established and infested that you have to do more. So jump on. Mugwort is one. Don't kid around with that plant. I mean, it is one that I don't even remember seeing as a gardener 20 years ago. So it has really grabbed hold in this area, and it kind of makes you sick to your stomach when you see some of the places it's completely invaded. And that is where, in the even some conservation people in open spaces have resorted to herbicides to get it under control before they plant natives. But that is the problem with mugwort. Okay, now we're moving to another one that many of you may still have lurking as a shrubbery in your garden. I see this in people's yards all the time, nicely trimmed and shaped and everything. Okay, so this is barberry. There are two kinds of barberry you want to look out for. Pam is showing you the common barberry, which is green. Common barberry is green. Japanese barberry is a nice burgundy color. I don't think she has any Japanese barberry to show you, but you've seen it. It is a nice burgundy color. That's both barberries have thorns. Pam's going to zoom in and show you some of the thorny. So the easiest way to spot barberry is by those thorns sticking out. You can see them at the node of every leaf. There's thorns. And barberry is an interesting plant because it has a kind of a pretty yellow, surprisingly pretty yellow stem under the bark. There it is. See that bright yellow stem? So if you weren't sure that you had barberry, you could spot it by that bright yellow interior, which is most unusual. Okay, now there's a couple reasons to hate barberry besides the thorns. And this is something that a study at UConn uncovered. And the fact is that barberries encourage ticks. There is a far higher concentration of ticks in areas where barberry is growing. We think it's because the mice take shelter under the barberries and eat the berries, and then of course that becomes a place to harbor the ticks. So there is absolutely no good reason to leave this stuff growing in your yard. If you have shrubs, go to the nursery and pick out a nice new native shrub to replace this with, because this plant is trouble. The other thing that it's doing is it's spreading. When I go for hikes in Aspetuck Land Trust, I see barberry that has escaped all over the place. So this is what invasives do. They adapt too well to a new environment, and they're all over the place. And the other reason they're all over the place is the deer aren't eating them. So our only choice is to get rid of it. So say goodbye to the barberry, even if you thought it was a nice shrub before now. Okay, so our next one is, Pam is going to show us multiflora rose. Now, she doesn't have the pretty rose blossoms to show you because those are all over the plant in June. But multiflora became invasive in this country because our ancestors, the settlers, planted it. They thought it made a dandy hedge. Didn't have to build a fence, just let this stuff get thick enough and nothing can get through it, even the sheep they're trying to keep in or whatever. So unfortunately, it is way too good at spreading on its own. If it where it flowers, where the roses form rose hips with which the birds do eat, and then unfortunately, here's some rose hips being formed right now. This is one you want to cut out before it goes, before this. You don't want this, this seed dispersing. That's one of the ways that multiflora roses show up where nobody put them, is that they disperse from the seeds. They're also a little bit, they sucker, which means they send up more and more shoots. If you let one grow, pretty soon you've got a whole bunch of suckers with the plant all over the place. So you can recognize this as she's showing you. There's actually something called a stipule, a hairy stipule, which forms at the base of each leaf base where it joins the stem. There's a stipule, which is kind of this, a stem with a, kind of like a little bit of extra hair on it. She's showing, there's a really clear drawing of it in the guide, which you will have. But the main way, when you see something that looks like a rose bush and has those stipules on it and has little tiny white flowers with a yellow center in June, that's what you've got, and you want to get rid of it. So multiflora can really chokes, it even chokes out forsythia, which is a pretty tough plant if you let it. So you don't tell yourself, oh, it's a rose, I can let it go. Not this one. It's really invasive. You just want to get rid of it. Okay. So for our next plant treat, Pam is going to show you something which is often mistaken for raspberries. This is wineberry. She's going to show you up close how to tell this from a raspberry. And wineberry has reddish thorns all along the stem. They have quite a reddish tinge to them, and they're along the whole length of the stem. Raspberries do not have that. So if you've got something in your garden that looks, where the fruit looks like a raspberry, but it has this all along it, hate to break it to you, if you really enjoy raspberries, then plant raspberries, which are native. But get this out of your garden, because once again, this wineberry has been invading our open spaces, and it'll invade your whole yard if you let it to. So this is one that's quite prevalent around here, especially in semi-naturalized areas. It's really hard to get rid of, but you can hand pull with thick gloves, or a spading fork to get the roots out. And you can also use one of those uprooter tools, are good with this one because it has a woody stem to it. So your uprooter tool will be able to get a good grasp of it and yank it out that way. Okay, so our next shrub that we love to hate. Oh, and I should have mentioned, you can use the uprooter tool on multiflora roses too, because it's woody stem, and you can use an uprooter tool on barberry. You just can't use it on herbaceous things like the mugwort, unfortunately, it won't work on. It'll just shred if you try to pull it up with one of those weed wrench tools. Okay, so the next one has several names you might know it by. Burning bush is the most famous name. And again, unfortunately, this was introduced into our gardens because I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty when it turns red in the fall. But you need to pick a native that turns equally pretty red in the fall. And there are a number of really gorgeous red turners, so you don't have to have burning bush. Now this one's a really tough one. I gotta say, oh, now Pam's showing, it's called winged euonymus as well. And see those flanges on the stem, the wings as it were? So this is another dead giveaway for burning bush. But overall, it's pretty darn easy to recognize with that compound leaf and with its shrubby habit and the fact that it's all over the place. This one, you can, if some of it gets to be tree size, and if it's tree size, saw it off at the base and keep sawing off at the base till it gives up. But smaller shrubs, you can use the uprooter to uproot, or if flowers are present or seeds, you do want to bag this. Again, watch out anytime, and I would say as a general rule of thumb, anytime you are getting rid of an invasive that is showing flower heads or seed heads, you want to get that bagged. You don't want to, you do not want that to end up, yeah, she's showing you a seed head right there. You don't want that to end up in the brush pile, the town brush pile, because it'll just spread when they mulch that stuff. And you don't want it in your compost for darn sure. Okay. So the next one is a tree. And I always say that I swear this tree, its common name is tree of heaven. And you know, the tree must have had a marketing department, because there is no way that this tree is from heaven. It is from hell. It's also called ailanthus. Now, as you're looking at it, you're saying, oh, I have that. I thought it was sumac. Well, you may have sumac, and you may have ailanthus. They're so similar, it can fool people, but there is a giveaway that your nose will tell you. This tree of heaven, this ailanthus, when you bruise the stem, which happens when you try to pull it out, it smells like garbage. It is the worst smelling plant when it's bruised. And if you are really in doubt, am I looking at sumac or tree of heaven? Bruise it, break the stem, and yep, smells like garbage. That's right. Now she's showing, see when it's a small plant, see how cute it looks? And they send up these shoots. I've seen tree of heaven come up through the sidewalk. And there's an interesting thing too. A lot of times I'll see a little tree of heaven, I start pulling, and I'm pulling and pulling. And what I get instead when I pull it up is a big, thick root. And that's because somebody didn't get the whole thing out and it grew back. So you do want, if you've got a tree of heaven sapling, get the whole thing out. If you wanted to treat the cut surface of a full-size tree of heaven, I would refer you to the technique for painting with herbicide that is referenced in your guide, because sometimes with Tree of Heaven, this is a tree that can grow through cement. Sometimes extreme measures are required. So Pam's going to show you one more, and then I have my own, we're going to revert to me and my slides. I've got one to show you too, but this is Pam's last one. And this is the famous bittersweet. And some of you have met bittersweet because you've noticed it when it climbed up a 25-foot tree. This plant just doesn't know when to quit. And you can kind of spot it when it's up in the tree. Hey, Pam, I noticed you've got one of those side shoots. See how it curls at the end? See how it twines and curls and finds its way up things? It just twines and twines, even twines around itself. So if you've got a great big thick one twining up a tree, cut that vine at the base. That will, don't try to pull it out of the tree unless it hasn't gotten very far, because that's the first thing you want to do is kill the part that's going up and choking the tree and shutting off the light from the tree. Then you want to deal with its roots, and she's showing you the lovely roots. Notice the rhizome growing off at a right angle to the rest of the stem. And when she brings it close to the camera, you will see the dead giveaway is that bright orange. See, bittersweet is the color. If you know bittersweet, the color orange, there it is. Bright orange roots, kind of like a rust-colored orange. And that's how you can tell. Sometimes those leaves are a little hard. Its leaves are irregularly shaped. And sometimes you're like, am I looking at bittersweet or something else? Am I looking at an ivy? Well, when you yank it and you see that orange root, you know what you've got. Bittersweet works really, really well with the uprooter tool also, because you can get a good lot of the root. Now you're going to say to yourself, but if I leave some rhizome behind, isn't it going to come back? Yeah, but again, you've really weakened it. I have to tell you, when we moved into our current property many years ago, the bittersweet had been allowed to covered an entire 35-foot spruce tree. That's how bad it was. And we went at it. And now we hardly ever find bittersweet in our yard. And when we do find it, it's not because we left some, it's because the birds gave us some. And she's showing you what the birds love about this plant. You know, when I say that invasives don't feed species, in this case, bugs aren't eating it, but the birds are still happy to eat the seed. So they're happy to help spread it because they fly and poop somewhere and boom, you've got another seed planted, unfortunately. You probably know this because those berries turn a beautiful orange color. And please don't be tempted to use it in home decorations unless you bring it inside. Do not use it outside, because if you put that pretty wreath or you put it as a garland on something, you're just helping spread the plant. So Oriental bittersweet, again, it will choke a mature tree, and it'll do that in the forest. So try to get as much of the root as you can. Cut off at the base anything climbing up a tree so that will kill that vine that's going up the tree. It's done. You just are dealing with the remainder. So that's the lovely bittersweet. Notice the different shapes of the leaves can really fool you. Okay, Pam, you're the very best Vanna of invasives we could possibly have. Thank you so much. So Mary is going to switch back to me, and she has. So. And I am going to show you our last treat of the evening plant profile. This is, I don't know if many of you have encountered mile a minute yet. We have quite an infestation going in Westport. And this is mile, whoops. I actually managed to hit, it's all right. I hit something, but you can see this, so it's all good. You can see the leaf. The leaf is triangular in shape. And every part of this evil plant is covered with thorns. It's even sticking to my hands. They're little tiny hooked thorns sticking to my hands and clinging to my clothes And when you're trying to pull it, it's just a bear. The important thing to know about this plant, besides nothing else looks like this, a vine with absolutely triangular leaves, it also has this weird little circlet that grows around each stem where it can, each leaf stem where it connects to the main stem. So you can't miss it. It's called myelamenid. It's actually capable of growing a foot a day, but it's an annual. Oh, and it gets pretty berries too. So don't let it fool you. Get it out. Just pull it and pull it. Interesting thing about this particular plant was part of an experiment UConn conducted, and it has holes in it. This is the myelominate weevil that made these holes. The myelominate weevil is trying to help us at Wakeman control this plant. But in other parts where I have found this plant growing, the weevil hasn't found it yet. So go ahead and yank it. You don't want this growing in your yard. Okay, so I've shown you, that was the last plant in our plant profile, and I'm going to go back to sharing my slides with you. So hang on one second. And I'm sharing my screen. Whoops. Sharing my screen. Here we go. Here we go. And I have an annoying little pop-up I never asked for that came, that decided to come in and annoy me right while I'm presenting, but here we go. So I'm back to full screen mode, and I'm going to quickly click down, click through. These are all the pests that I showed you today, the vines, and in closing, and we will absolutely take your questions after this. So happy to answer any specific questions, but this is my closing thought. Everybody says, well, how do I really get rid of weeds? Well, one and done, they will always be with you. One and done doesn't really apply to weeding, sadly. Weed seeds come back. Weed seeds have been found to live in what they call the seed bed in the ground, in the soil, for years, and they're there trying to be born always. So the main thing is to remember that as long as you keep depriving the plant of its means of reproduction, which means getting rid of the annual plants before they set seed, and cutting down the pests before they can use photosynthesis to send food back down to the roots, this will eventually defeat the plant. So the last really important point is that when you remove an invasive and you don't plant something in its place, you've just created a job opening. So when you get rid of an invasive, have your plan for what you're going to plant in its stead. There are, and I'll cover this more if you want to know more about this in the Q&A, about where to look for your natives to replace your invasives with. But it's a really important thing to do, is you leave that opening there. Invasives love disturbed soil, and they'll move right back in if you don't put something in its place. So this is the handbook created by our Staples High 2020 interns, and couldn't have done it. Special thanks to Aspetuck Land Trust, who very kindly let us meet with Lou. I'm going to mispronounce his last name, so I'm just going to skip it. You can look it up on an ALT site. But Lou took us around and shared with us the problems that the invasives are creating in the open spaces, and Wakeman Town Farm to organize this event, and of course, last but not least, the Pollinator Pathway. And hope you guys are joining the Pollinator Pathway in Trumbull. And my personal thanks to the Master Gardener program for teaching me all this great stuff. So That's it for tonight. In the back of your presentation, you'll find a useful glossary and some really interesting additional sources of information, including how to tell Tree of Heaven from sumac and all kinds of stuff like that. So good stuff. And it was great having you guys here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take any questions that you have. Anybody? Is there anything in chat? Mary?
In chat, I just wanted to let you know that Marcia, who was one of the first to join the Master Garden program.
Oh, great.
But if anyone has any questions, you can unmute and ask.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that Tam?
All right, so how will I get this handout that you have tonight? Is that going to be downloaded from this meeting?
You're going to, I believe, Pam, unmute yourself. Oh, she is unmuted. Good. Pam, aren't you going to, you're going to post this, right? So people can download it?
If you go to the Sustainable Trumbull Facebook page, we are going to post the link to it. Or you could email us your contact information and we can send it to you that way if you don't have a Facebook membership.
Okay. I have to join the your group to get this access to it.
You just follow the page on Facebook and
Okay.
you'll see our posts and we'll put it up so you'll be able to follow. And then we also have a YouTube channel, Sustainable Trumbull YouTube channel that we'll put it on.
Okay. Oh, fantastic.
And
Fantastic.
it's also on the Wakeman Town Farm site. So.
Okay. And then the one thing I did miss was, what's your recommendation for controlling the Japanese knotweed? I was pulling my chicken off the grill at that time.
Well, if you don't have goats handy, Japanese knotweed is best controlled in the home garden by assiduous cutting it repeatedly so that it never has chance to shoot up more leaves.
Okay.
And the plant will eventually give up the ghost. If you just have a teeny infestation, you can try pulling it out, but try to get all the rhizomes.
Right. I've had some success pulling it out, but it will come back. But
Yeah.
just got to keep at it. Okay.
Yep. Don't let the leaves really sustain the plant.
Yes, I understand. Okay.
Anyone else?
I'm Dagny Hassinger. The
Hi.
Japanese stiltweed, I've had a garden for over 40 years. I've never seen that before. Is that something that the birds have spread? Because I'm infested with it this year and I didn't realize what it was.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I do not remember seeing stiltgrass until a couple years ago. So I suspect it probably came in potting soil with an imported plant. So let's say somebody, had a Japanese azalea, and in the potting soil could have been the seed.
Yes, now I understand. I have gotten other things that way.
Yep.
I've seen it come through from our landscapers who will go from one yard to the other cutting the grass, and that's how I've seen my garden. My problem.
That is very true. Yeah, unless they're cleaning the blades between lawns, which.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not possible.
Only if you're the first job of the day, then you're okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other questions?
And on that, I've got a tree of heaven here that we're enjoying its beauty this year. It looks like a palm tree,
Mm-hmm.
but I will get rid of it, and I will probably use a chemical application to get rid of it in the fall.
The other thing that I forgot to mention, a recent problem with the tree of heaven is that it is also the host plant for spotted lanternfly, and this is a really destructive insect that looks like a moth. It's actually very pretty, unfortunately, but it is so destructive. It's been it invades things like vineyards, orchards and just devastates them. And it hasn't, they found one dead one in Connecticut so far, but it's well established, unfortunately, in Pennsylvania. So I fear it's a matter of time. And their host plant is the tree of heaven. So it's like having a magnet, like eat here.
Okay.
Yeah. So another reason to get rid of tree of heaven besides the other ones.
I interrupt again? This is
Sure, go ahead.
Sure.
I have a huge problem with trumpet vine. And when I bought it from a nursery fellow, he wouldn't charge me. He says, once you have trumpet vine, you always have trumpet vine. And I just wanted to say that you have to be careful what you ask for, because several of the things that I have problems with were things that I asked for.
Yes.
Trumpet vine, I guess, would be cut it to get rid of it. But the vine, they're such a deep-rooted vine that I cannot get them, and it spreads terribly. It's moving into my formal areas rather than staying where it was planted.
Yes. I unfortunately heard trumpet vine many years ago attracted hummingbirds, so I planted it. And I think this is the first, and then I realized what I had done and yanked it, what I thought yanked it all out. And I believe this is the first year I haven't seen a new shoot coming up. And that was, oh gosh, 12 years ago. I tried to get rid of it. It's pretty. But I don't believe it's classed as an invasive in Connecticut. So this is, you know, you got your 10 most wanted, and then it goes from there.
Yeah.
Before before everybody logs off, I would mention that there are a lot of tools at your disposal for identifying plants. And Alice and I were talking the other day about what we each use. I found an app for my phone called Picture This, and it's been great at identifying what the plant is, and it points out if it's an invasive in the country. But there are other ways of doing that.
It's true. iNaturalist.org is another great app that I enjoy using for identifying these kinds of things.
And then one other thing to point out is that most garden centers now will have a native area if their whole garden center is not natives. So be sure to look for that. And there are a lot of websites that sell native things for meadows or native plants. There's so many sources for this if you don't have anywhere near you.
Yes, actually, in Trumbull, you're pretty close to Native, which is on Reading Road in Fairfield. And Native is the closest nursery that is 100% native. Other nurseries in the area have good selections of native, but that one is strictly native, so it's kind of nice to go there and not have to keep stopping and asking somebody, is this native, is this native? I mean, there it is. So, and it's pretty convenient for you guys, just a hop, skip, and a jump from where you're based, if you're based in Trumbull. There's also Earth Tones is a native nursery that's excellent. And Gilberti's in Westport has a good, strong selection of natives. Oliver's is good with natives too. And those are great places to take your search.
Any other questions before we say goodnight? Well, thanks everyone for skipping Jeopardy this evening. I appreciate the attendance. And Alice, thank you again so much for your time and for your expertise. It's great having you.
You're welcome, Pam. Thanks so much for the opportunity to bring this back and get it recorded this time.
Hopefully.
Mary.
Thank you both. It was great. Very
Thank
well
you.
done.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.